Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Scottish Greens want to incorporate the right to food in Scots law. It's set out in the UN International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Lorna, what does that actually mean, having the right to food enshrined in law?
Well, it's really interesting. I thought John's comment just there on what he thinks should be enshrined in the Constitution. And it's something that I find, and young people in Scotland particularly find interesting about the idea of Scottish independence, is that we would be at the birth of a new nation. And something that we could do is have, well, that we should do and will do, is have a written constitution. And historically, when countries have had the opportunity to sit down and write what rights they're going to enshrine in their constitution, they do freedom of religion and voting and so on, but there's no reason at all we shouldn't enshrine actual human rights in there, such as the right to food, housing, remunerative work, and so on. Now, we're not yet at that point. We haven't yet won the independence referendum. So in the meantime, I think it is still worth enshrining human rights to law.
Right, but Lorna, what I mean is, what would it mean in practice?
Right to food.
Yes, I understand what it means from a sort of constitutional legal perspective, but what would it mean in practice? What would it mean for families? Are you talking about increasing benefits in order to meet that human right that you would have enshrined in law, or is it about food parcels being delivered to families in need in perpetuity? What does it mean?
Well, first of all, it would just be about the principle of that. And then you need to look at the way that can be implemented. And you're absolutely right, benefits for the Scottish Greens, we would much rather people had money in their pockets that they can decide how they spend it on. Part of it is about how food comes to our tables and where people have the options to buy food, setting up of local food cooperatives, for example, meaning that people can share food, that we're not having to go through big supermarket chains that create, profit-making enterprises, that we look at it in a joined up way. Where is our food grown? How is it transported to the people who eat, and so on? And you can set up these networks to make sure that everybody has the food that they need, nutritious food for every child. And simple things like school meals, which we have in Scotland now. Right,
well, we'll perhaps come on to that example if we have time. But Danny, actually, this is an idea that's also been talked about in some Conservative circles because the Tory MP, Neil Parish, in a report, he's part of the committee, Commons, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, agrees that it should be considered enshrining in law a right to food.
If you enshrine a right law, what it means is that courts rule on what the right means. So you were asking Lorna what it meant, but it doesn't actually be for her to define it. Ultimately, that will end up being defined by the courts. And you have to decide whether you think that's a good idea, because it legalises a lot of politics, and therefore some of the ideas that she puts down will not be the ideas the courts have. But the broader point, which is whether food poverty is now an increasingly severe and clear problem.
And the figures say it is, yep.
It obviously is. And I think that a concerted effort to ensure that it isn't the problem, that this problem isn't allowed to persist. And, one of the things would be to make permanent the change that has been made in the school meals policy during the holidays. But that's only one measure. That is the right thing to do, definitely. But I'm not in favour enshrining abstract political rights that Lorna can then describe vaguely what they would stand for, which turn out to be coincidentally what she thinks would be a good idea. That's not how I think we should proceed with politics. That's a constitutional question rather than about food. OK,
Claire, your response to the idea in principle and perhaps in practice, and while you're talking, we're just going to be showing pictures of food banks because there has been a significant rise in the use of food banks over the course of the pandemic, a rise of 88% of independent food banks over the period from February to October 2020.
So I'm really opposed to the use of legislation and the law in this way. It actually feels like a lowest common denominator rather than an inspiring vision. The idea that people have the right to food, well, I should bloody well hope so. That's what one would say. I kind of get nervous as well that, John's points about the dignity of work. I mean, what I want is for people to have the dignity of autonomy, of their own agency, to be able to decide on their lives and have enough money so that they can survive and have food and choose whatever food they want and not actually a green version of where you buy the right food from. So, there is food poverty, but what there is poverty. And when we talk about the pandemic, this wasn't an act of God. Decisions were taken, policies were made, people have been impoverished. It's not a food problem. It's not a law problem.
Right, let me get John's response, because we've only got a minute or so.
Okay, well, Ripley, I'm really inspired by the idea, actually. I think Lorna's idea is a great idea, because a series of economic rights as to rethink citizenship is a statement of what we think a just society should provide. And it is a statement of intent which calls politicians out to deliver on it. So I think it's a sign of rethinking the community that we can be in the future as we come out of this pandemic, because we can't just go back to where we were.
Right. Well, Lorna, you've got the support of John there. What did you think, and respond to the others, Danny and Claire, in terms of your idea?
Well, I think that we absolutely need to enshrine the right to food. You know, in doing it in legislation, as John says, does set out an intention, and then it would be for political parties, knowing that this was the law, to put forward their policies and proposals. And I can see that a Conservative Party would put forward different proposals. But the truth is, work doesn't pay. We've made work so precarious. Minimum wage is a poverty wage that people can't feed themselves, and we have to do better than this.
All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you to all of my guests for a fascinating programme. That's all we have time for today. We'll be back on Monday, as will I, at 12:15. From all of us here, bye-bye.
Killing for fame. How does prison change a murderer? Julia Shaw and comedian Sophie Hagen are back for a new series. Join them as they dissect the criminal cases that shock, intrigue